you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, you guys, I want to talk about coping. A lot of us, most of us, are dealing with things right now that we need to cope with. A lot of these are brand new experiences as well, and in some cases, compounded experiences. So I want to talk about stress management as it relates to coping strategies. And we'll specifically be discussing emotion-focused coping as well as problem-focused coping. And my hope is that as we discuss these things, maybe you find some areas that will work better for you than whatever you've been able to do so far, or you'll find something new, rather, to turn to. Like the first time my friend discovered hot yoga. It was around for quite a while before she came around to it, but when she did, that was like her perfect health and wellness fit. She found what worked best for her. And y'all know I have recently been trying to work more on my emotion-focused help for my friends rather than problem-solving help. So now we're going to see a couple of the differences in stress management as it relates to these issues. So first up, as we discussed in our episode on stress a few months back, stress happens when your body perceives a difference between the physical or psychological demands of a situation that you're going through and the resources that you have available to you, whether those be biological, psychological, or social in nature. And your body can't really tell the difference between a perceived threat that is physical in nature or a psychological one. Remember, they did some studies with EEGs, and they found that the same parts lit up in a person's brain when they were inflicted with physical pain versus psychological pain. Your body just doesn't really entirely know the difference when it comes to the stress response. And so it is going to still perceive a discrepancy between the demands of your situation and the resources you have available to cope. However, there are so many different ways of coping with stress, and you really have to pick which one is right for you based on the particular stressor, the thing that's causing you stress, as well as the particular individual and the circumstances. So for example, I've discussed in the past how my go-to in helping my friends resolve problems is problem-focused emotional support. But for a lot of folks, they need emotion-based emotional support. And I've been trying to grant more of that, or rather to work more on that in myself so that I can reflect it outward for my friends, if that makes sense. But I'm a problem solver first and foremost. So that's how I approach issues. And that includes my own stress as well as that of others. However, I have other friends who are very emotion-based in their stress management. They are emotion copers, and they also are stressed in that same manner. So they'll help you by trying to make you feel better emotionally that's their go-to instead of focusing it on trying to solve the problem. So the TLDR is there's different strokes for different folks, and your individual circumstances, personality, and the stressor you're exposed to, whether that be losing your job or having to be in the home all the time when you are someone who's extroverted or just really feels the need to get out for your mental health. There are so many different types of stressors. And so it's important to learn about the different coping strategies so you can choose the best one to fit your specific circumstances. So the first step is going to be emotion-focused coping. Emotion-focused coping is trying to reduce the negative emotional responses that you exhibit and associate with stress. And that can include embarrassment, anxiety, being afraid, depression, excitement, and even frustration. And that can be the only realistic option a lot of times when the source of your stress is outside of your control. And that's okay. Drug therapy can be viewed as emotion-focused coping because it focuses on the arousal caused by the stress and not necessarily on the problem. However, some other emotion-focused coping techniques include distraction, so keeping yourself busy in whatever form that may take to take your mind off the issue. For some people, that may be online dating. A lot of my friends have referred to it as a good distraction. I have my own personal feelings about that, but it is something that I've heard a lot of folks say, so you can distract yourself with that. My go-to distraction is throwing myself into work, which is also not necessarily very healthy in a way, or very helpful for solving the problem. It's just taking my mind off of it. Emotional disclosure can also help you out, and that is just writing down or talking about the negative events that cause the emotions that you're experiencing now. That's something that they do a lot of in psychotherapy. So it's like journaling at that point and working your way through what is actually bothering you. And you guys know I am a big fan of journaling. I still need to get back into it. I need to make time for it instead of just throwing myself into my work. But it's important to be able to process these emotions. Some folks also turn to prayer for guidance and strength as an emotion-based coping technique, as well as meditation like mindfulness, eating comfort food, drinking alcohol, using drugs. Writing in a gratitude diary is also included in this, as well as cognitive reappraisal and suppressing. Cognitive reappraisal is a change in your thinking that involves construing a potentially strongly emotional situation in a way that changes its emotional impact. So that's really something that you tend to do with a counselor. Whereas suppression is just telling yourself you can't think about this. You're just going to not think about it. You're going to stop these negative thoughts or emotions. But suppressing your emotions, especially over an extended period of time, can really mess up your immune system, and it can lead to poor physical health. So it's important to process and essentially release these emotions instead of suppressing them. You have to go through all of the emotions and the thoughts in order to work your way through it and help them to subside. I think of it as being similar to getting a song out of your head. For me, if I just sing the song all the way through, then it gets out of my head. But if I'm just stuck on that 7 to 10 seconds of it over and over again, or just the chorus, and I can't sing it the rest of the way out, then it gets stuck in kind of a loop. I don't know if that is true for you guys, but it is very apt for me. So with emotion-based coping or emotion-focused coping, there are a few different strategies you can try, but they tend to be ineffective because they ignore the root of the stress. The type of the stress and whether that impact was on your physical or psychological health or a combination of the two can really explain how the strategies and the health outcomes are interrelated. Some scientists have found that patients with cancer who used avoidance strategies, like denying that they were very ill, deteriorated more quickly than those who faced up to those problems and dealt with them. And that same pattern exists in studies related to dental health and financial problems. Emotion-based coping doesn't really give you a long-term solution, and it can have negative side effects because it delays you working on the problem and actually dealing with it. But if the source of your stress is outside of your control, then that can sometimes be the best choice that you can make in the situation and circumstances you're in. Gender differences do need to be reported for this, and in general, women tend to use more emotion-focused strategies than men, according to several studies. And I think that that makes sense considering how we socially condition men and women in very different ways. All right, we are going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about emotion-focused strategies for stress management. Stay tuned. If you're stuck for ideas about how to develop your logo, website design, or business cards, DesignCrowd can give you access to 750,000 creative minds from around the globe. Once you've launched your brief on their website, designers will start submitting quality designs for you to review. You can even provide constructive feedback to quickly generate a large pool of designs that really fit your actual needs. Rather than paying expensive fees and waiting weeks for an agency to pitch you an idea, you can have exactly what you need in only 3 days. And once you've selected your favorite design, you'll be sent all of the files you require to update your branding. If you don't like any of the submitted designs, then DesignCrowd offers a money-back guarantee. It's quite rare that folks don't like their designs, though, because the crowdsourcing model means you don't take a risk on just seeking out one designer to nail your brief. You post the project, and if you don't find a design you like, then no worries, you get your money back. Right now, for a special VIP offer for our listeners, check out designcrowd.com/health and wellness to learn more and save up to $150 when you start any project. That's DESIGNCROWD.com/health and wellness, no spaces, or simply enter the discount code health and wellness when posting a project on DesignCrowd. Get your perfect design today.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were introducing the idea of different focuses in our coping strategies, including emotion-focused strategies and problem-focused strategies. So now we're going to talk about some of the most commonly used stress reduction and management techniques that focus on the emotions for dealing with it. Up first is redirecting, discovering, and rediscovering. So this one is really purposely looking for distractions that will take your mind off of the issue. And you can do that by keeping yourself busy with your work or school. But if work or school is the thing that stresses you out, of course, you would be looking for other tasks or work to do. If you're not enjoying the project that you're on for work, you can try a different project or do a task or a side project that may be a little bit different from that one. You may still have to do that other current project, but perhaps you can also divert some of your attention so it doesn't feel so heavy. You can take on more workload, but make sure it's still within your capacity. That way you're not dealing with the stress of being burnt out on top of the stress caused by your current project. You may end up being one of those people who cleans the whole house when you're stressed. That used to be me when I was in college. My roommate would come back and the entire room would be absolutely spotless because I needed to get that extra energy out of me, and that was my go-to way for doing that. Of course, it was cleaning and everything. She didn't mind. I didn't inconvenience her for it. It's just when I was stressed and she wasn't in there, I would just go ahead and clean the whole room. So it worked out fine. You can also seek out a new experience to take up some of your time. So you might get tired of your routine. We've spoken in previous podcasts about how routines can be very helpful, but they can also be very damaging in some ways. As you get used to them, you become accustomed to the routine, which again is the purpose of the routine. But sometimes too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, and that also goes for routines. They help us to preserve our eating and sleeping habits so that they are cyclical and that we are having the basic setup of sleep and food that we need in order for our bodies to do their best job. But they can also get you into a rut. And that's when it's a good idea to find a distraction that is totally separate from what you're doing for your work. So you can find a new hobby or learn a new sport or sign up for some type of lessons, Spanish lessons, cooking lessons. They don't even have to be in person or online. Just download an app. Maybe you want to start writing. And if you don't like the writing, that's fine. You can find something else to replace it. You can try painting if you've always wanted to try your hand at painting, or work on building something. There's a lot of things that you can do, especially at home. And the more ambitious the project, the more of your attention it's going to take up, and it's going to be more effective as a distraction. So also think back about when you were younger. Was there something that you've maybe always wanted to do, but you weren't able to do it because of the circumstances back then? Maybe you wanted to learn how to play the saxophone, but you couldn't afford the saxophone at the time. Or perhaps you wanted to start volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, but they didn't have any projects available in your small town. Well, maybe you can go ahead and pick up a sax now, or start that volunteering, or take a carpentry class, if you'd like, at your local community college maybe, to see if that's something you would be more interested in doing. It's just giving it a chance, and it's okay if you don't end up loving it. At the end of the day, you'll have the knowledge that you tried it, you will know that you don't like the thing, and it will have been an effective distraction. Go ahead and also try things that maybe you had to give up previously. So I love reading for fun, but when I was in graduate school, it was pretty much 2 straight years of reading like 1,000 pages a week. It was a lot, you guys. And there was just no time for reading for fun between work and school and all the other projects we were doing. There just was not time in the day for it. I would, in fact, have to read my journal articles for class in the bathtub with a glass of wine if I was going to be able to relax at all. So sometimes my self-care would also be studying. So in that regard, sometimes you're not able to do the things that you enjoy for a long time, and it can even be something small that you have to give up. I'm not sure a lot of people would even consider reading a book to be a hobby, but I think that it is, at least for me. And so reading for fun, at any rate, was something I had to give up for a while, and books were still around me, but I could not read them. So even if it's something small, like picking up your knitting needles again and going and reading a book or something like that, then you can go ahead and pick up an old hobby again too. Think about the things that you used to love and when you gave them up, and see if maybe you can pick them up again. In addition to seeking a new experience, you can also travel. Travel is one of the best ways to create new experiences. And if you're having old, stressful memories that are plaguing you, then replace them with some brand new ones. Now, I know it's not a one-to-one replacement. We don't get to shelve our memories like we shelve books and pick and choose what stays and what goes. But we can go ahead and try to add on to them so it more or less creates those negative memories as being outliers, and these new positive memories are the base component of our data when we are referring to memories. So you don't have to just pick up and go to another country for 2 weeks. You can start small. You can just go on a weekend getaway to a neighboring town or a nearby city. So if you've always wanted to go to New Orleans and you live within a few hours of there, maybe try that out. Not right now, granted, because we are in social distancing and we should all be not traveling. But once this is all over, it can be a very good outlet for a lot of your emotions that are associated with stress. Then you can scale it up to traveling to other countries if you're feeling really adventurous. You could even travel within your local area in your states or city-states or your districts, just depending on how the area you live in is split up, and check out some cool areas with a travel buddy or by yourself. Solo traveling can be a lot of fun, but so can having a travel buddy. Your goal is just to put yourself in a new environment and be exposed to new people and settings and cultures to give you a learning experience, a chance for growth, a way to cultivate awe like we've discussed in the past, and that can help you reduce your stress. Cultivating awe can be just as effective as meditation. It's just a different side of the same coin, more or less. So you can go out and do things once we're allowed to again, and it's safe, and be able to use that to reduce your stress, just like you could for meditation. In addition to travel, you can also affect changes. So maybe you're just sick of your environment. I know that a lot of us are there right now, and we can't really go on a getaway, and we might want to do something more permanent, like maybe move our entire home. I'm supposed to move this summer, you guys, and I'm not sure if we'll be allowed to move, or if it would be a good idea, or if it would be feasible. There's no telling what is happening in the coming months, but we're going to see. Sometimes we cannot change our circumstances, and then we are challenged to change ourselves, as Viktor Frankl said. You can try rearranging your home, though. So change your living room environment. Change your living environment in general. Maybe put up those paintings that you've been letting sit in the corner of your dining room if your name is Alex and you host this podcast. Maybe go ahead and decorate your bedroom, even if you are moving out in a couple of months. You can't live like a bachelor forever. Again, I'm talking to myself, but it is applicable to everyone. Go ahead and put up some of those posters that you got from all of those shows you went to, or try and change your routine in the morning for when you wake up. Today, I woke up and I watched the movie Jaws, and it was great. I really enjoyed myself, and it helped reduce my stress. You can try even just the slightest change or shift to find a more positive effect on your stress levels. Maybe instead of regular coffee in the morning, you start making you a caramel macchiato, and having something nice is great for a pick-me-up. It can really help you out in what you may think are small ways, but they're really small changes, and they can help you out in big ways. All right, guys, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some more emotion-based coping. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Before the break, we were talking about some types of emotion-focused strategies for managing your stress, including redirecting yourself to be distracted by something else, discovering a new experience, or rediscovering something you loved before and had to leave behind, whether that be reading for fun or practicing guitar, what have you. Now we're going to talk about emotional disclosure. This is probably what most of us are thinking when we think about emotion-focused strategies, and that is let it out. So stress can make you feel suffocated in many ways, and having a lot of strong emotions that need to be released and are kind of just bubbling under the skin can really stress you out even more. Sometimes that bubbling is really just telling us we need to let this out. And it's good to do that. One of the best ways that you can do it is by having a heart-to-heart conversation with someone you trust. Now, I know, if you're anything like me, it's not necessarily that you're not good at being vulnerable, but you don't enjoy it, per se. And it's weird because at the same time, a lot of us lament not being known or seen or heard completely, not truly being understood, but we're also reluctant to open up to others. And in order to be seen and truly known and understood, that's something you have to do. And that's the importance of cultivating a solid support system. So you have these trusted people, even if it's only one or two people that can help you when you are upset. So you can turn to your parents or siblings, if you have siblings, or your best friends. And that's for if you just need somebody to listen, or if you need a shoulder to cry on, or just to talk about it. Get it out, you guys. So I don't particularly enjoy it. I'm not going to lie to y'all, but I have been turning to that more as I've gotten a little bit older. So I grew up being raised very boyish in many ways, and as such, I'm less comfortable with being able to have certain conversations. But I try. That's the important component, and I'm getting better at it as I get older. Even though emotion-focused strategies are overall found to be not the best overall ones, because it's not really changing anything. It's like taking medicine to fix the symptoms, but not addressing the primary cause. But it's really important for you to learn to be able to have those conversations. That's important for your emotional wellness, as well as your spiritual wellness, and your mental wellness, and your physical health. Because as we discuss, these types of stressors can really manifest in physical symptoms at a certain point. And I don't mean manifestation in like the metaphysics type way. I do mean it in like the very literal way where it is created from that. It stems from another thing. And you, of course, are welcome to look at it however you want, including either of those ways. But I do mean it to all of my especially pragmatic listeners out there who pride themselves on pragmatism like I do, then it's okay, is what I'm getting at. It is okay to need someone, and it's important to be able to open up at this point as well. Sometimes folks can really give you good advice, and sometimes just the physical touch can be really helpful. Sometimes they can also distract you afterward. So it just depends on who your person is and how they can help most. And it's important to be that person for other people too. It might be uncomfortable at first, but that's one of those things that you learn experientially. No one teaches you how to be there for someone who has lost a loved one. That's something that you learn firsthand through comforting others and through being comforted yourself. And so if you feel like you don't have a good support system, it's important to try to cultivate one and to also be there for other people. Journaling is another big way for emotional disclosure to be expressed. So you can write it out rather than speaking. Or if you aren't quite comfortable talking with just one-on-one somebody that you know, then you could even start your own private journaling. Think of it like the captain's log from Star Trek. It is bound directly to you. It's just you doing a video journal. You don't have to share it with anyone. The captains weren't putting them on YouTube or anything like that. And in fact, Cisco did an entire one and then told the computer to delete it because it was quite incriminating, actually. But I digress. My point is that a personal diary can be written, or at this point in our lives, we're in 2020, it can be read aloud or just expressed aloud, and you can just keep it to yourself. Or if you feel like sharing it with someone, then you can. A lot of folks tend to write in specialized journals, and that can be a lot of fun if you like books, especially if you like, getting pretty journals and stuff to write in, and that makes your bookshelf look all nice. So I'm one of those people, if you can't tell. I enjoy it. A lot of the ones I get are the decomposition books because those are made from recycled materials. So that's my favorite. It's a composition book, but just made from recycled materials. So they call it decomposition, which I also think is funny. It's a clever play on words, and I always appreciate those. So in a study conducted by clinical psychologists a few years back, they found that you could use gratitude intervention to improve mental health. And they talk about how writing what you're thankful about in your diary or journal can also help remind you of these events when you go and read them later, and that can in turn also reduce stress. You can also, of course, get this out by having psychotherapy sessions with a professional. Seeing a licensed professional counselor for psychotherapy sessions can help folks out a lot. They're also trained to help you come to the right conclusions. And not even the right conclusions. When I say right, I mean the conclusions that your mind is drawing. So a lot of that is based on figuring out how we feel. And so there isn't really a right or wrong way to feel in many ways, right? There is no inherent right or way wrong to feel. So that just depends on your circumstances and who you are as a person. But by them asking you questions like the often poked fun at, and how do you feel about that, is actually very valuable because it's helping you to get to the crux of the issue, which is helping you to put a name to your emotions and process those emotions. What has been named can be combated, more or less. It can be addressed, is how I should say it. What is named can be addressed. So that's the value in seeing a professional, really. And it might look silly when you see it on TV, but I have a lot of friends who have gotten a lot out of their psychotherapy sessions. And I know a lot of really great friends who I go to when I am upset They actually are getting their psychotherapy degrees and such. So these techniques have worked in my experience, and also the scientific data supports it. You can also go for communication and connection, or reflection and introspection. So that's like meditation. And one of my personal favorites, cognitive reframing. It is focused on thinking objectively before you act. So it is very similar to meditation, and meditation helps people get in touch with their emotions and to feel calm and peaceful. And that's why it's helpful for a lot of folks who are stressed out. It can also help you to ease the tension and fatigue in your body, and that can also reduce your stress levels in your mind. However, cognitive reframing is more intentional thinking instead of meditation, its cousin, which is more like intentional not thinking. All right, we're going to go on a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about cognitive reframing. Then after that, I have to make it up on the fly. You can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or product. Whether that's a logo, website, book cover, or an ad campaign, a quality design can make a big difference to your overall engagement and success, especially in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has access to over 750,000 global designers that they'll invite to submit a design within hours of you posting your brief on their website. These designers span the globe from Sydney to San Francisco, and all you have to do after posting your brief is pick the design that you like best and approve the payment to the designer. A typical project on Design Crowd gets between 60 to 100 designs from designers around the world. Harvard Business School's Innovation Forum has even used Design Crowd to obtain a logo. They received over 267 logo designs from 57 designers around the world. But you don't have to be Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd. You can start a project on Design Crowd for just $99. And right now, as a special VIP offer to our listeners, check out designcrowd.com/health and wellness to learn more and save up to $150 when you start any project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness, or simply enter the discount code health and wellness when you post a project on Design Crowd.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about other concepts you can turn to for dealing with your emotions and stress, like communication and connection, which is rather straightforward, as well as reflection and introspection. I think that meditation is the most widely recognized from that group, but you can also participate in cognitive reframing, and I really like this one. It's associated with pausing to be in the moment and forcing yourself to think objectively. So maybe you're not looking at it at the right perspective. Maybe it's not something that requires you to stress out. And even if it is, does it require this drastic of a response on your part? And I don't want to conflate this with anxiety. I also have anxiety, But when I'm reacting to something out of fear or panic, it has always helped me to think objectively about it, even when I had not been diagnosed with anxiety. It was just something that I did, and I would turn it over in my head like the pieces of a puzzle, or kind of like a Rubik's Cube, to get a full idea of all of the different perspectives on this item, and then determined whether the one that I was looking at was the most likely to be correct for that. And that actually helps me with my anxiety. It helps me to go, hey, this is something that is upsetting. Your friends who are also into these things would be upset, or who, would be familiar with the context would be upset, but you might be too upset. You might be more scared than you really should be. Maybe tone it down to aware instead of scared. And that's something that helps me to recontextualize what I'm experiencing as well as my response. And it's not even the same as finding a silver lining, but you can also do that in cognitive reframing. You can look at it from a different perspective and look for something specifically beneficial that is coming from that stressful situation. So in the example of someone who may have been rejected from a job recently, reframing can help you by having you look at the situation from the perspective of the recruiter and that person who made the final decision not to select you for the position. And you can step back and really see, like, maybe there was another candidate who was chosen for the job who was a better fit for the position. And that's something important to keep in mind. There's always going to be someone better than you in certain things, whether that is your hobbies or your job or different aspects of how you interact with the world around you. No matter what it is, someone's always going to be better at it than you are. And that's okay. That's totally okay. You're going to be better at it than a ton of other people. It's all on a spectrum, and it's not a race. Sometimes you can commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness. That is life. And that is also a Captain Picard quote, if you guys have watched Star Trek The Next Generation or Star Trek Picard. And it's something that stuck with me a lot. It's very important to understand that it's not all about you. And when we go, there must have been something that I did that was stupid or wrong that was a mistake, and that's why I didn't get this. And it's important to be cognizant of the fact that we can make mistakes, but statistically, it's not likely that we're going to be in that situation 100% of the time when things don't go our way. It could be that someone else just walked in and they have 7 years of experience and a master's degree in something you only have your bachelor's for and 2 years of experience. And that doesn't denigrate bachelor's degrees. You have to get your bachelor's before you get your master's. But a lot of times, this is going to be someone who is a bit older than you. They have not only gotten their advanced degree in this, but they've also been on the job market for longer. And when you're in those positions, it allows you to come up against more problems in the wild, more or less. So you can go to school and train to do something, but experiential learning is very important, and it can be very valuable because you can't teach every case scenario in school. Some things you truly have to learn on the fly, on the job, and a company is going to choose a person who has that experience rather than someone who doesn't. On paper, it makes sense. That has happened to me recently with the job that I wanted, but I full and well know that someone else who had more experience than I did would have gotten that position, and that's totally okay. I got through 2 rounds of interviews. So instead of looking at it as something that I have lost, then I recognize it for what it is, and that they had a good reason for selecting who they wanted for that position. It's not personal, and it's totally okay that I made it through those 2 rounds of interviews before that point. Now, that's just more interview experience for me to draw upon when I am going for these interviews in the future. So it's lessons learned at that point. It can also be helpful to email in and ask for feedback. You're only going to get it about a third of the time, just saying. But it can be good to ask. Sometimes you're going to get a really good response. Sometimes you'll get no response at all. But that is something that helps me when I'm applying for things that I really want and I don't get it. You can also take the experience as just a learning experience. I'm real big on cognitive reframing, you guys. So pretty much all these types of cognitive reframing, finding the silver lining, taking it as a learning experience, and stopping to think through everything objectively really works well for me. This method works really well for me, and it is a lot better than just sinking into your own self-pity and giving up completely. It can be difficult to start out doing, but it can be very efficacious in my experience. A lot of folks also pray and have spiritual or religious activities, or they get more involved in health and wellness through like playing sports and having a treat yourself day where you go ahead and do your face masks and just pamper yourself. It is looking after your whole being at that point. There's also a lot of folks who recommend the power of positive thinking. This is not one of my favorite ones, but I know it's one of the favorites in the zeitgeist, so we're going to talk about it a little bit. A lot of folks want you to be just an eternal optimist, and you do that through, I guess, sheer force of will. But that's another form, in my opinion, of stuffing your emotions down. And so it's not one of my favorites, because you may be embracing positivity, but you're doing so at the expense of all else. So it's positivity and only positivity in those situations. And that means you're repressing or suppressing. You're consciously pushing down those other emotions. And it can be problematic. So I don't believe in toxic positivity, which is what I refer to as being positive at all costs, no matter what, and not taking the time to be truly mindful and feel the feelings. But you can get some awesome things in your life too from positive thinking. It can help you feel more empowered, and it can help you reassess the way that you view your problems and situations in your life, so that when these stressful situations arise, you can take them in stride instead of feeling overwhelmed. Lastly, on the list, we have drug therapy. So by that, we mean pharmaceutical therapy for the most part, but some people do try to use alcohol to self-medicate, and it allows them to forget the stress momentarily. But it's very important not to become dependent upon this one and for it to not be your go-to one. Remember that with drug therapy of any type, it's mostly just treating the symptoms and not the actual cause or the problem behind it. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about emotion-focused coping in cyberbullied kids.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some different methods for emotional coping. Now I want to talk about a specific study in emotion-focused coping and how it can worsen depressive feelings and health complaints in cyberbullied children. This article is by T. Volink et al. 2013 in the Journal of Criminology. So in this study, they looked at a bunch of children who had been cyberbullied, and they were trying to find a way to see why their well-being was impacted differently. Previous studies in that field have largely been inconclusive about the precise causes as to the precise reasons that some children are more heavily impacted by cyberbullying than others. So in this study, they surveyed 325 children, and they focused on the role that coping strategies played in the relationship between them being cyberbullied and how they responded to that, particularly as that relates to feeling depressed and having health complaints. So they measured it with the cyberbullying questionnaire, which is a go-to form in that field, as well as the Utrecht coping list and a questionnaire that was designed specifically for that study. For the health issues, health complaints, they measured those with the short questionnaire for experienced health and depressive feelings with the shortened form of the Children's Depression Inventory. So what were their results? They found that 18.8% of children were bullied by mobile phone and 24% were through the internet, 24.1%. And they ran some correlation analyses on this, and it showed some really strong relationships between victimization, coping, feelings of depression, and health complaints. They performed a regression analysis on that, and they found that in all children, victimization, general emotion-focused, and problem-focused copings had main effects on their depressive feelings and their health complaints, particularly in regards to the emotion-focused coping interactions with victimization and health complaints. Now, they also did a simple slope analysis of kids with high scores on emotion-focused general coping, and they found a stronger positive relationship between victimization and health complaints. So these kids who are feeling more victimized are also seeing impacts on their health. A positive correlation or a positive relationship in statistics doesn't mean a favorable one or a good one, but rather it means that as one type of variable increases, the other also increases. So as victimization increases, health complaints also increase, and the vice versa is true. They decrease. They really co-vary, so they are variables that change together. On the other hand, a negative correlation or association is one in which when one variable tends to decrease, the other increases, or vice versa, when one increases, the other decreases. So that's what we mean when we say positive and negative in terms of statistics when we're talking about these health studies. So when they did this, they found that the children who expressed a stronger feeling of victimization tended to also have more health complaints. They performed a regression analysis of only cyberbullied children and found that only emotion-focused, cyber-specific coping was associated with more health complaints and depressive feelings. So this study found that it matched with most of the previous findings in showing that almost 1/4 of the 11 and 12-year-old children that are surveyed are victims of cyberbullying. There were some U.S. and Canadian studies that have found higher rates, and the present study that we're discussing also indicated that girls tended to more often be victims of cyberbullying than boys. As in a lot of the other studies, they also show that victimization tends to increase with age, and that younger children were more often involved in cyberbullying. They also studied some other age groups that weren't really comparable with this study. They also found that the victims of cyberbullying have more health and depressive complaints compared with non-victims, which is in line with earlier findings, and something that may just seem very apparent, but we have the data now to back that up. They also showed that problem-focused coping could result in fewer health complaints and depressive feelings, and that emotion-focused coping definitely led to more health complaints, or was definitely correlated with more health complaints and depressive feelings. But they did not find that problem-focused coping could buffer the negative effects of victimization on health outcomes. So they found no interaction at all between victimization and problem-based coping, and victims did not show less problem-focused coping than non-victims. So a lot of other studies on traditional bullying found that close emotional support from peers and parents helped to buffer the effect on the relation between the actual act of cyber victimization and the subsequent development of depressive symptoms. They are not entirely sure exactly why, and other studies have found things to the contrary. So they do a really good job in this study of listing out their limitations, which is very important for scientific studies to do. And they are seemingly very transparent about it, as well as support the further research, especially in longitudinal studies. So following these kids over the lifespan to see how they do as they get older and if it continues to track as they age, and so on and so forth, to see if maybe there are any other confounding variables in there, or if they need to adjust their hypotheses. Emotion-focused coping was overall related to more health complaints and depressive symptoms in the whole sample and in the subsample of victims of cyberbullying. So they found that emotion-focused coping was more strongly associated with reporting health outcome complaints in cases of high scores with victimization. And that is when it's compared to having low scores on emotion-focused coping. So TLDR, they studied the whole sample of kids, that is, kids who were bullied and kids who were not in the sample, and then the subsample of the victims who were cyberbullied. And that number ended up being about 90 or so. And so the interaction they found was their third hypothesis, and that was that kids tended to say that they felt more victimized and reported more health complaints when they also said that they were more emotion-focused in their coping instead of being not very emotion-focused in their coping, perhaps turning more towards problem-solving. So for traditional bullying, a lot of other studies find very similar findings. It's a little strange that they refer to it as traditional bullying, but I do get why they chose that terminology. But it seems strange to refer to it as traditional bullying versus cyberbullying. Although I suppose bullying has been around for ages. So in that way, I suppose it is passed on via terrible traditions. And anyway, for traditional bullying, other studies found very similar results to what they found in the cyberbullying. And they also found that kids who use coping strategies aimed at avoiding the stressor, so any type of avoidance behavior, those kids seemed to experience more health complaints than those who used problem-focused coping strategies. So when I talk to you guys about coping and stress, there are very real empirical studies that say that it can cause physical health problems and that it can also be very unhealthy to choose avoidance as your primary or only coping strategy. It can impact your health negatively. Generally, problem-focused coping is considered to be far more effective and sustainable than emotion-focused coping. In this study, though, they were very surprised to find that problem-focused coping did not seem to be very important. It was just null. It had no effect one way or the other, seemingly. So they really recommend doing a future study to consider multiple sources of information, including their parents, their peers, and their teachers, to see if there is some social perspective that could be offered. And they also want to study kids like this in a longitudinal setting in order to further explore this data and maybe get at some of the whys now that they have some of the whats and hows. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the concept of forgiveness as an emotion-focused coping strategy. Stay tuned.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about emotion-focused coping and what that can look like in kids. So they found that a lot of kids were utilizing emotion-focused coping, and it exacerbated their feelings of victimization as well as general depressive feelings when they were given these surveys. That is the general correlation, but they expected to find that problem-focused coping would be a bigger deal. So now we're going to talk about something that is debatably both or either. Forgiveness. So a few years back, some researchers, Worthington and Scherer, wrote about how forgiveness can be an emotion-focused coping strategy, and they purport that it can reduce health risks and promote health resilience. They have looked at some experimental evidence, and it suggested that when people are transgressed against interpersonally, oftentimes they react by experiencing something they term as unforgiveness. So they are conceptualizing unforgiveness as a specific type of reaction to stress. They think that forgiveness is one of many ways people reduce unforgiveness, and that forgiveness is really conceptualized for them as the emotional juxtaposition of other positive emotions like empathy or compassion or love against the negative emotions that are found associated with unforgiveness. So if you frame forgiveness as being in this web of emotions, or this spectrum almost, it's closer to a semiotic square, I think, of having empathy or sympathy or love for someone against those negative emotions, then it becomes emotion-centered and an emotion-focused coping strategy. And they think that that can reduce a stressful reaction to whatever slight your friend or the person on the other side of this has committed against you. They've done some direct empirical research and found that forgiveness is related to health outcomes and to mediating physiological responses in such a way as to support the concept that forgiveness can really be an emotion-focused coping strategy. They find that indirect mechanisms might also affect that relationship between forgiveness and health, but forgiveness might really impact health by working through social support, relationship quality, and religion. So here we see again the importance of viewing health and wellness in a holistic manner. This concept of forgiveness is generally referred to be something that you do for your spirit, but here it is framed for your emotions, and it is also underlined by that type of social wellness, by having that social support and quality relationships, and perhaps even a religion to turn to, like a church family. Not just religion itself, but the actual bodies who were in the church. So I find it very interesting that they have selected this path for it, and I can see their argument. I can also see why this may be hotly debated, but I like this concept of framing it in an emotional way. So it's like earlier when we were talking about different ways that you can express your emotional coping, your emotion-focused coping. And one of those ways was through cognitive reframing. And that's kind of what it comes down to here, is we are cognitively reframing forgiveness to be a tool of emotional wellness, to be a tool of emotional coping. So emotional coping is really a toolkit. And in that same way, so is problem-focused coping. So for me, it helps to cognitively reframe forgiveness as being an emotional tool rather than just thinking of emotion-focused coping as the conglomeration of all of the different tools, really. So thinking of it separately helps me to process it better, and it helps me to accept it more as an emotion-focused coping strategy. At least in my experience, a lot of times people will tell you to forgive someone because it is for you. It's not really for the other person. And I get that. I understand that argument. And it is pragmatic in that way, but it doesn't make forgiveness any easier, at least in my experience. That sense of unforgiveness can be really hard to let go of, especially depending upon what specific transgression someone has committed against you. So it's really important, though, for us to think about this in different ways. I'm a big fan of thinking about different concepts from different philosophical points of view and trying to find where I agree with them in the mix of all of them. So that's the only thing that I would recommend for this, is if you do decide to go ahead and read this article, to see what fits for you and what doesn't. The only way to really find what doesn't work for you is by exploring the world around you. I think that a lot of things we can come to on our own philosophically for what we do believe in, but it's also important to understand the things that are out there that we don't believe in or agree with and why they make us bristle. So this concept of emotion-focused coping does make me bristle a little bit, but that tells me that that's a place for inner work and personal growth, and I need to dig into the why of that. So really what we're getting at for forgiveness and emotion-focused coping is that it links forgiveness research to the field of stress and coping. It also really suggests potential studies that forgiveness researchers could pursue in health psychology, because it intersects with a ton of other subfields. Social psychology, developmental psychology, clinical psychology. When stress enters into the equation, when you are studying its relationship with forgiveness, then it becomes a whole nother ballgame. And just like we need to view the human body and our mental health and our spiritual wellness as being one holistic form of health and wellness, where we are addressing each of these components in their own turn, it's really important to view your human body like that, as well as it is to view types of research. These interdisciplinary studies are really important for shining a light on areas we might not have considered before. I never would have considered the concept of using forgiveness as an emotion-focused coping strategy had I not read this paper. And that's the importance of it. When you bring another pair of eyes to the study, because now you have folks who are in both parts of this research mandorla, or perhaps there are very many of them involved. So think about a cross study between health psychology, social psychology, developmental psychology, and clinical psychology as it relates to forgiveness. They're each going to overlap in slightly different ways. And when you layer them all on top of each other, you get an even more defined picture of precisely what they all have in common. And it can be very illuminating in ways we might not have seen on our own without this intersectional study or this intersectional look at our health. Forgiveness can also be something that is necessary or present at any level of interaction between folks. That includes the socio-political levels as well as the intrapersonal and interpersonal levels. You need to see with more research whether forgiveness can affect relationships in friendships or coworkers or romantic partners and family levels. They want to really go through and study this in a bunch of different contexts, including those that are relevant to the criminal justice system and national and international political levels, as well as health and healthcare issues. I think that really what it truly comes down to is giving people space around you to be human and to come to them with compassion when you are slighted sometimes. Now I know no one wants to turn the other cheek, and that's not really what I'm saying, or maybe it is what I'm saying, you guys. But what I'm getting at is that think about how you have messed up on something in the past. And then think about how hard that potential thing was to own up to. And how difficult the process was. And whether the person that was involved in it with you made it harder or easier for you. Those kind of things tend to stick out in my mind, and I imagine that they do in yours as well, because we may not remember the things that people say or even what they do, but we do remember how they make us feel. And so by approaching forgiveness with empathy and compassion and trying to objectively step back and cognitively reframe what is going on with this situation and how it could have been misconstrued on either side to get to the heart of the issue, you are more likely to have a successful dialogue in forgiving someone or in obtaining forgiveness for yourself. I think that asking for forgiveness is very similar in concept to learning how to console someone through grief. Experiencing it on both sides of the equation can really give you a more well-developed toolkit for dealing with it when forgiving others, when forgiving yourself, and when asking or earning forgiveness from others. It can be really difficult to approach those conversations in any direction. But if you approach it with empathy and you objectively sit back and think about the times that you have been in similar positions on both sides and what could have helped you more in either situation, it can be really helpful for having healing conversations with folks. If you're choosing forgiveness for any reason, including as an emotion-focused coping strategy. This particular study on forgiveness as part of the emotion-focused coping toolkit also says that they are thinking that forgiveness may potentially be used as proactive coping to help you essentially build resilience for this stress, and that they want more studies done on the links between forgiveness and health. Lastly, they recommended that forgiveness can really be taught as an active coping strategy instead of just as an emotion-focused coping strategy. And they think that a lot of folks who at first seem to be really excellent candidates for forgiveness interventions are folks who are already high in trait forgiveness, but they could just naturally be more likely to forgive folks than someone else. So the researchers would like to look into that a little further, and they think that the better candidates for studying these interventions may actually be people who are moderate or low in trait forgiveness, so they can help write off that perhaps natural propensity to forgive when they do look at the results. And they feel that that really needs an empirical answer. I was rather fascinated by this concept. I've done some research myself on forgiveness in the workplace with one of my research buddies, as our research relates to leadership and management skills and organizational management. But it was really interesting to read about forgiveness from this different perspective this time. Instead of it being about leadership, so how you affect others, it really being about your relationship with yourself. So I like this concept. I'm going to have to read some more about it and see if there's more recent research, but it seemed very intriguing. And now we also have this new concept of unforgiveness to work with and to equip ourselves with as we have these conversations with other folks going forward. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.